Well, we're looking at section number 5 in our series on God's Jubilee. We've entitled this one The Avenger of Blood. It's actually more broad than that. We want to look into the interplay between the cities of refuge as intended in the original land allotments after the conquest of Canaan, found in the late in the book of Joshua. But first, we got something left over from last time that we promised, and that's a particular case of levirate marriage. It's still hanging. We haven't gone through it. It's a case in which everything seemed to go sideways. Many of you, I'm sure, understand what I'm talking about here. We'll see that in a second or so. You probably know of the case and the consequences for Jesus more than 1,000 years later. Genesis tells us how the patriarchs learned of that situation. I'm going to start back in Genesis 38, particularly verse 24. Now it was about 3 months later, and we'll discuss 3 months later than what, that Judah was informed, and here's what Judah was informed about. Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has played the harlot, and behold, she is with child by harlotry. Then Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Adultery was a big issue in those cases. Didn't even have to be adultery, actually. But this was prior to the giving of the law. This was before the Exodus, well before, hundreds of years before the Exodus. And so there was no God-given law to the Hebrews about stoning, which was typical for adultery after Mount Sinai. Well, Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar, was about to be in deep trouble, and that trouble had begun months earlier. How many months? Well, at least 3 months, which was our introductory statement in Genesis. Now, it was about 3 months later. Later than what? Later than the event that we're about to describe. So to go back up a bit in Genesis 38, back to verse 6, and look at verses 6 and 7. Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn. So Judah has 3 sons by now. The first one's name was just E-R. It says, now Judah took a wife for this his firstborn son, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, in the sight of Yahweh. Had been considered evil. So the Lord took his life. God said, Judah's firstborn is evil, get him out of here. So he did. So God took out after his marriage to Tamar, and before had any male offspring. That's why the levirate marriage now comes into place. Okay? We have the marriage process ready to be used by Judah for Tamar. Judah would be the big guy in the family, of course. He would be the patriarch, and so his would be his responsibility for for getting another of his sons to be husband to Tamar in place of and provide a son under Er's name. So if he were to do this, that son would be Er's son legally and would continue the family name. Let's go to 38 and look at the first five verses. So we're backing up even a little bit further. I'm going to look at verses 1 through 5 of Genesis 38. This is where we begin the story of Judah, his sons, and Tamar. And it came about at that time, this was whatever that time was, that Judah departed from his brothers. So Judah, living at home, now takes off on somewhere, going somewhere. And he visited a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hirah, Hirah. And Judah saw there, at this place of the Adullamite, he saw a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, Shua. So here, Judah is out and about. He sees this woman. We don't know her name at this point, at least. But she was the daughter of Shua, who was a Canaanite. So this young woman I assume was young, would have been a Canaanite. She's not a Hebrew, evidently. And he took her and went into her. Now, at this time, again, there's no law, so there's no law preventing Judah from picking up a wife who is Canaanite, not Hebrew. So she, this young Canaanite woman, conceived and bore a son and named him There's where Judah picks up his firstborn son, Then she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. So Onan is number 2 born. And she bore still another son and named him Shelah, Shelah. So there are Judah's 3 sons in order of birth, Onan, Shelah. Judah's wife isn't named here, but her ethnicity was. She is Canaanite. So Judah had 3 sons, the firstborn, Onan the second, and Shelah the third. When God took out, Onan and Shelah were first and second in line to be the levirate brother and the kinsman redeemer for Tamar. Judah acted in concert with God's instructions. So we go to Genesis. Now we're going to go up to verse 8 and 10 through 10. Verses 8, 9, and 10 of Genesis 38. Then Judah said to Onan, number 2 son, who's now first in line. He is number 1. Go in to your brother's wife, that was Tamar. Perform your duty as a brother-in-law, that's the levirate brother, to her, and raise up offspring for your brother, who is of course. So Onan is to go in and become the husband of Tamar, produce a child, a male child, to raise up the line of And verse 9, and Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. It would be his physically, but not legally. So it came about that when he, Onan, went into his brother's wife, Tamar, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. So he's going in, taking his pleasure, if you will, with Tamar, but he is insisting on behavior that will be sure he does not produce an offspring for as required by God's instruction. Verse 10, but what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord. Essentially, he said, Yahweh, stick it in your ear. I'm not going to produce a child for through Tamar. So God took his, Onan's, life also. So, God took life because was evil. God took Onan's life because he would not perform his responsibility to Tamar, and to for that matter. So, since the situation of a childless remained, who was next in line? Shelah, Judah's third son. But you can see Judah's mind. This guy, my firstborn married Tamar, and he's gone. I did the honorable thing and sent my second son, Onan, to Tamar. He's gone. What's he thinking? Am I going to lose my third son, Shelah, too? Let's look at Genesis 38, verse 11, and we'll see Judah's responsibility. Now, remember, Judah is the progenitor of a tribe that is going to produce David. It's going to produce Jesus. It's going to be produce the Savior of the world. But here is your patriarch of that group. In verse 11, chapter 38, then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, so Judah goes to Tamar, not to Shelah. Remain a widow in your father's house. There's something else about this too. A young woman, until she's married and stays married and so forth, is the responsibility of her father. And so what is Judah saying? Look, go back to your father who has responsibility for you now, technically, in the culture. Go back to his house until my son Shelah grows up. In other words, he said, my third son is not of marriable age, or marrying age. For he, Judah, thought, I'm afraid that he, Shelah, too may die like his brothers. Now, think about it for a moment. He's worried about his third son. He's lost two who were husbands of Tamar. But they were not taken out because of anything Tamar did. They were taken out because of their own behavior problems and their own unwillingness to obey Yahweh. So, what happened? Tamar went and lived in her father's house. She knew her father would care for her, protect her, provide for her, and so on. Short point, in that culture and in those circumstances, the childless widow often became again the dependent of her father, who assumed responsibility for her as she became a childless widow. Well, you probably know what happened next. Judah never got around to Sheila's acting, and I don't know whether it's Shayla or Sheila, actually. I spelled it for you. That's close enough. But he never got around to send his third son to act as the levirate brother-in-law. So, what happens next? Most of you already know. Tamar is going to take matters into her own hands. She will pose as a prostitute and intercept Judah as he traveled from point A to point B. Somehow she knows where he's going. She goes to be at some spot along the way where she will be seen by Judah. She will pose as a prostitute and try to entice Judah. Tamar requested and received, by the way, what I've skipped here is that she was successful. Judah saw her. She's veiled, so he doesn't know who it is. But he said, oh, okay, here's a prostitute. My wife is dead. I'm alone now, so I will go into her and satisfy myself. I assume that was his thinking. But not knowing that it was Tamar, he solicited her services, and put quotes around services, if you please. Tamar requested and received several objects. It turns out Judah wasn't prepared to pay her for her services, but he said, I promise that I will send, I don't know, was it goats or sheep, something as payment for her services. But so she said, wait, whoa. She asked him, and he gave her several objects identifying him personally. They were a pledge from Judah to Tamar in promise of payment for services rendered. And as we've already seen, Tamar became pregnant with Judah's son Perez, P-E-R-E-Z. And another interesting fact, technically, Perez was the second born. It turns out that Tamar had twins. Perez stuck his hand out, and I forget exactly what it was that the handmaiden did, so that she could identify who stuck out their hand first. But actually the second son, the other son in her womb, was born first. Perez was born second. So technically Perez was not the firstborn of Tamar, but he was, of course, eventually selected as a ancestor of Jesus and David. So let's go back to Judah's reaction upon learning of Tamar's pregnancy again, and in learning of his own paternity. Let's see this. This is where he goes. He's ordered her out to be killed by fire. So Genesis 38 verses 25 and 26. It was while she was being brought out, to be burned, of course, that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the man to whom these things belong. And she said, please examine and see whose signet ring and cords and staff are these. And Judah, of course, knew whose they were. They were his. And Judah recognized them, this is verse 26, and said, she, Tamar, is more righteous than I. He knew that she had to do something, she thought at least, and she was right in Judah's sight now. She was right in doing what she did to gain a son for to prolong and continue the family line. And of course, Jesus and David are both of the line of Judah. And he says, he recognizes she's more righteous than I am, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah. So he said, I know I should have. I didn't on purpose. She's got more righteousness than I do. Judah recognized his role in all of this. So in case you're looking for a timing mark to know when all of this took place, the very next chapter, chapter 39 in Genesis, what does it talk about? Joseph's difficulties with Potiphar's wife. So this takes place years before the family of Jacob has to go to Egypt because of the severe drought, where then they are taken care of by their son Joseph. And remember also that Judah had a hand in sending Joseph to Egypt. He did do some work that ensured that Joseph would live, because the sons wanted to kill him, the other sons, some of them at least. So he helped make sure that Joseph got to Egypt. But this is after he sent to Egypt, Joseph, apparently, but before Jacob and the rest of the boys go to Egypt. So this is hundreds of years, at least 400 years, before they even return back to Canaan. So several hundred years are going to go and take place before this story continues. The Judah-Tamar episode, again, took place before Israel's, the Hebrews, who would eventually make up Israel, took off and went to Egypt. Therefore, the law, when it was given at Sinai, was well after this point. So Judah's desire to execute Tamar when he found out she was pregnant, but before he knew he was responsible, he was going by culture of that time in that vicinity, not by God's law. The law that both man and woman caught in adultery were to be stoned was not yet in play. If it had been, Judah would be as liable for the fire as Tamar. But Judah's impulse to burn Tamar had to impact him when learning of his own role in the event. When he had to admit that she was more righteous than he had to also know how low down he had been in finding a prostitute. Extra note, it may be well the case that Tamar was Canaanite. We don't know for sure. She may not have been Jewish, although there is still debate about it. Why is there still debate about it? Well, remember, David later had a daughter named Tamar. So Tamar is not automatically a non-Jew ethnically by name. So we don't know about Tamar. All we know is how Perez got born and how Tamar's name appears in the genealogy of Christ. You remember the women that appear in the genealogy of Christ? Rahab, a Canaanite, Ruth, a Moabite, Tamar, whom we're not sure about, but who acted as a prostitute to keep the family line going, and Bathsheba, who was likely a Hittite, or at least she probably was not Jew herself. So these women in there all have very prominent roles in Jesus coming to be when he during the incarnation. And Matthew and Luke, which of them, probably Luke, makes sure that they are known, but that would have been unheard of in that day, for example, to have women's name included in genealogies. They're technically not in the genealogy, but they're named in concert with the man who is. So, interesting. And again, while Tamar's son Perez was to continue the family line of instead it's listed as continuing the family line of Judah to David, through David, and then to Jesus. However, there are at least two other women. We've already gone through that, so I'm going to skip that. Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, so forth. Some dispute among, as a matter of fact, if you were, I probably shouldn't go there, but I'm missing a term right now. But there are those who will claim that Ruth was in fact not Moabite, but was a Jew living in Moab, as were Naomi and her husband and sons when they took Ruth as a wife and Orpah as a wife. But there's no scriptural evidence that that is true. She is simply listed as being a Moabitess. Well, it's time to take a look at the notions of city of refuge. And by the way, in Hebrew, the word we translate as refuge really refers to intaking. So in a sense, you could call cities of refuge as cities of intaking. And who is it they take in? They take in people accused of the death of another individual. And they deal then with the idea of the Avenger of Blood. So there's a whole cultural thing wrapped up here too, just as much as the levirate marriage is. The goal was this, for the culture to be able to deal with one person killing another, whether accidental and unintentional or not. In other words, murder or not murder. If it was accidental, unintentional, with no hate involved, then the cities of refuge were open to protect these individuals from the Avenger of Blood. And that's another person we're going to look at. The cities of refuge are not for the protection of murderers, by the way. The first incident in Scripture dealing with these ideas came from Cain killing Abel, where God intervened after Cain had killed Abel. God comes to Cain, and the Lord said to Cain, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." And this is a term that's going to come up in more than one spot. Blood crying out from the ground. Abel was innocent when killed, innocent from any reasonable notion that he should have been killed. He was considered innocent. And his blood, God said, is crying out from the ground. And we're going to see later that God says, if you have blood crying from the ground because one was killed and no one has paid a price for that, then the ground is polluted, it's corrupted, and it's my ground, it's an offense to me, and it shall not go untended. Verse 11, and now you are cursed, God speaking back to Cain. You are cursed from the ground. His blood cried out from the ground. You're cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. So that sets the background for some of what we're going to look at. After the great flood, after Noah's time, God spoke again. And he spoke this to Noah in Genesis 9:6. Whoever sheds the blood of man, and this is really speaking of murder here, by man shall his blood be shed. If you murder a man, you will be killed by other men. You shall. For God made man in his image. And during the Exodus, God made a related point through the law itself. This is after the flood. It's after the Cain and Abel thing. We see it in Numbers 35, verse 33. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for the land. In other words, you can't deal with murder through something dealing with the land. For the blood that is shed in it, you can't atone for that except by the blood of the one who shed it. So it's going back to Noah after the flood. It's going back to Cain and Abel. So there's a problem to be dealt with. One man's death at the hand of another. Murder where there is intent and malice. Accidental death where there's no intent, no malice. Accidental. God spoke to that dichotomy when speaking about the 6 cities of refuge among the 48 cities of the Levites. Remember that there were 3 cities of refuge east of the Jordan, 3 cities of refuge to the left of the Jordan. They were placed strategically so that if you killed someone accidentally, this example we're given is you swing an axe, the head comes off your axe, hits somebody, he dies. Well, you can get quickly to one of the 6 cities of refuge and be protected until there's a hearing to determine that it was accidental. Do you remember God's choice of the Levites and the swap he made with the people? It actually comes back into play at Jesus when he was taken to the temple. Deuteronomy 10, verses 6 through 9. Now the sons of Israel set out from Bereth Bene Jaakan to Moserah. I have no idea where those places are. There, and this was evidently, though, east of the Jordan, because there Aaron died, and there he was buried. Aaron, like Moses, never made it to the promised land. And Eleazar, his son, Aaron's son, ministered as high priest, says priest, but it's high priest, in his place. From there they, the Israelites, set out for Gugada, and from Gugada to Jotbahath, and a land of brooks of water. At that time Yahweh set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, to stand before Yahweh to serve him, and to bless his name until this day. So Levi, tribe of Levi, was chosen so that the Levites were servants of God 100%. And then in verse 9, therefore Levi does not have a portion or inheritance with his brothers. And this, we're talking about an inheritance of land. Yahweh is Levi's inheritance, just as Yahweh your God spoke to him. So God set Levites aside as his personal ministers. And in Numbers 3:11 through 13, we read a little more. Again, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, now he's giving instructions to Moses about all this. Now behold, I have taken the Levites from among the sons of Israel, instead of every firstborn, and it means, of course, every firstborn male. So every firstborn male of every family actually belonged to God, and God said, I'm going to make a swap. I'm going to take the Levites. The first issue of the first issue of the womb from all these firstborn among the sons of Israel. So the Levites shall be mine, for all the firstborn are mine. On the day that I struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. What God said? When I took down on the day of Passover the firstborn in Egypt, all the firstborn of Egypt who were not under the blood on the doorposts, all the firstborn of Israel belong to me. Now I have swapped them for the Levites. Take the Levites instead of them. I sanctified to myself all the firstborn in Israel, from man to beast. They shall be mine. I am the Lord. So what's happening is, we find later on that the firstborn that were God's, he swaps for the Levites. But if you want your firstborn son back as yours, you have to redeem him with a sacrifice in the temple or the tabernacle prior to that time. So let's go back to God's words on dealing with one man's death by the hand of another. We find that in Deuteronomy 19, verses 4 through 13. It's a little longer piece here, but it's important for our study. Now this is the case of the manslayer. This is the man who kills another, whether accidental or on purpose. They're still called manslayers. And so keep in mind, there's a penalty attached to being a manslayer, because the man is made in God's image. So if you kill another person, there's a price to be paid, even if it is accidental and without intent and without hate. We call that manslaughter in some cases, but there's a penalty for that. But in the case of the manslayer, who may flee there, that's to a city of refuge, and live when he kills his friend unintentionally, not hating him previously. So this has to be completely without intent and completely without malice or hate. As when a man goes into the forest, here's an example he's going to give, goes into the forest with his friend to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree, and the iron head slips off the handle and strikes his friend so that he dies. This man who just did this, the manslayer, may flee to one of these cities, cities of refuge, and live, lest the Avenger of Blood pursue the manslayer. Every family, in the case where someone in your family is killed, there is one closest to him called the Avenger of Blood. It's not that he's after the blood of the one who killed your relative, but he's avenging the blood of your dead relative, and it all has to do with the purging of the land. Lest the Avenger of Blood pursue the manslayer in the heat of his anger and overtake him, because the way is long, and take his life, though he was not deserving of death. Put that, and since he had not hated him previously. So what's it saying? You kill someone, there's somebody in that family who is the Avenger of Blood, who will come after you, regardless, whether it's due or not, whether you should pay with your life or not. If it's not accidental, you should not pay for your life. But if your cities of refuge are so far away you can't get to it before he catches you, he's going to try and kill you. So we want these cities set where the chances are greater that you would make it to one of these cities. Verse 7, therefore I command you, saying, you shall set aside 3 cities for yourself, and if the Lord your God enlarges your territory, just as he has sworn to your fathers, and gives you all the land which he promised to give to your fathers, if you carefully observe all this commandment about the cities of refuge, and he's just talked about 3 of them, so this evidently is east of the Jordan before they've crossed over, which I command you today, to love Yahweh your God, and to walk in his ways always, then you shall add 3 more cities on the west for yourself, besides these 3 east of the Jordan. Verse 10, so innocent blood will not be shed. See, because if the Avenger of Blood kills someone who should not be killed, then the land is polluted. God said, ain't going to want that to be true. So innocent blood will not be shed. You will get to the city of refuge in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance. So there's not going to be that pollution taking place for your death. But if there is a man who hates his neighbor, this is verse 11, and lies in wait for him and rises up against him and strikes him. So there's intent, planning, premeditation, and he strikes him so that he dies and he flees to one of these cities. Suppose this murderer goes to a city of refuge. Then the elders of his city shall send and take him from there and deliver him into the hand of the Avenger of Blood. If you're a murderer, they should take you out of the city of refuge and give you over to the Avenger of Blood, that you may die, or he may die. Verse 13, you shall not pity him, but you shall purge the blood of the innocent from Israel. So if it was a murder, he's got to die, that it may go well with you. So, excuse me, this is very complex. The Avenger of Blood idea seems crude to most today, some even uncivilized. It was a way, however, to put capital punishment in place for murder as a sort of break on the idea of murder. It was saying, if you kill somebody intentionally, there's going to be somebody coming after you, and he has the permission of the culture to kill you so that the land doesn't become polluted. So that's what it is. It really is an attempt to reduce the likelihood of murder. Same thing that capital punishment is all about. Cities of refuge were a limitation on a Hatfields versus McCoy type of feud. Because what's going to happen? One person kills another. The Avenger of Blood goes after him, kills him. One of his people, as Avenger of Blood, comes after the Avenger of Blood. And back and forth, until, when was this stop? When one of the two families is wiped out. So the culture's got to deal with that. So of course, the goal was to give some stability to the community, make it a place where life can flourish with solidarity. Prior to the cities of refuge, however, there was a place of sanctuary, and it was found by going to the tabernacle and later to the temple. If you had accidentally killed someone, you could run to the temple, run to the tabernacle, go into the altar and hold on to the horns of the altar. But it wasn't a get out of jail free card, as is described in 1 Kings 2:28. If you were a murderer, then the sanctuary did not protect you. You would be taken from the altar and put to death. But it was a place of safety in appropriate cases. And you can see that in 1 Kings 1:50, where a person went and grabbed the altar I think this was back in the tabernacle, grabbed the horns of the altar. It could have been the temple, because Solomon was the king at this time. So, but anyhow, he went to a place of sanctuary. Solomon, in looking at the situation, says he deserves to be released, and so he was. No one had permission to kill him. But in the first case I talked about, in 1 Kings 2:28, Solomon said, take him out and kill him. Similarly, cities of refuge were no get-out-of-jail-free card either. They guaranteed safety only until a trial could be held to determine whether it was murder or accidental. So there was always a trial to be held. If it went against you and it was given to you that you were a murderer, you were turned over to the city people from which the murder took place, and you would likely be turned over to the Avenger of Blood for your death. But if you were it was an accidental death, you were not guilty of a capital offense, you should not be killed, then you were allowed to stay in the city, and the Avenger of Blood could not touch you. But I mentioned earlier, if you kill someone even accidentally, there is a price. The manslayer, the one who killed accidentally, was essentially incarcerated in the refuge city. He could not leave the refuge city until the death of the high priest. The death of the high priest was the only thing that could gain the manslayer's release from incarceration in the refuge cities. In other words, you could never go home, even though you were innocent of murder. You had killed someone accidentally. You could not go back to your home until the high priest died. So, leaving early, what happened? You were open to the work of the Avenger of Blood. And we talked about that. The Avenger of Blood isn't because he's out for blood. It's because he's avenging the blood of the one who is deceased. And that is, I think I mentioned at the tail end of maybe at the last session, they call this the law of retribution, or is given mostly in Latin lex talionis, L-E-X-T-A-L-I-O-N-E-S. The law, you know about Pax Romana, which is another version, which means the law, the peace of Rome. It would be Lex Romana, the law of Rome, too. So we've got that set in place. So what's the city of refuge? It's a intaking point for someone who has killed someone until there is a trial to determine whether it is accidental or murder. If it's murder, he is released to the elders of the city in which the murder took place, and the Avenger of Blood may have his way. If it's accidental, the person, the manslayer, stays in the city until the high priest dies. But think about that for a minute. It is the death of the high priest that pays whatever penalty you have for that death. Does that sound familiar? In a sense, you could look at the death of the high priest as a substitutionary payment for your death, for your responsibility for the death of another. Think about it. You can find the same information in Numbers 35, beginning at verse 9 and verse 35. Goes through most of verse 35. We're going to stop here with this brief discussion of death, Avenger of Blood, death, the Avenger of Blood, and city of refuge, so forth. Next session, we're going to go back to Leviticus 27 and actually begin to examine the scripture as it relates to God's Jubilee. I said Leviticus 27, it's actually Leviticus 25. We may not get very far in there because this is a very complex set of issues. that runs throughout all the parts of the culture of that day. And so there's a lot of front material that has to be looked at in order to understand what is going on and why. Keep in mind, one primary idea. Jubilee is God's procedure for resetting some things back to the way he originally established them as Israel began life in the promised land. What God's doing is saying, I know things are going to get sideways. They're going to be to the right, to the left. They won't be straight ahead. There's going to be some things so that years after you've started this process, things are not going to look the same. We need a process to go back to what I had in mind originally. So that's the idea. Over and over and over, there'll be a point of time in which everything can be reset if you will.